Hello and welcome back to Soccer Supernova, a State of Mind's dedicated football chat show with me, Amy Canavan. Today I am beyond delighted to be joined by the ex-Charlton, Luton, Aston Villa, Pisa, Celtic and Chelsea defender Paul Elliott. Paul, it is an absolute honour. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Oh, hi Amy. Listen, I'm always honoured and delighted to be invited to talk football, but more importantly with a club of the magnitude and stature and affection for Celtic. So I'm good. I'm delighted to be here and was really keen, obviously, to engage with yourself when the kind invitation come to appear on your radio programme.
I am beyond honoured. Thank you so much. So you touched upon it there, obviously. We all know you are a former Celtic player. But let's go right back to the start. You grew up in Lewisham. How did you find that sort of environment growing up as a youngster? Challenging.
Lewisham, I mean, now you just wouldn't recognise the place. It's been so sort of gentrified. But back in the day, it was great. I loved it because there was a freedom about communities like Lewisham, and you had a lot of my family has sort of come from the West Indies. They come from the Windrush generation, and there was many of them that really sort of settled in that part of South East London. So you had Lewisham, New Cross, Brixton, all those sort of suburbs. So growing up there, there was a sense of freedom. We didn't have a lot, first generation immigrants. It was obviously, we had the struggles, but we had lots of love and we had lots of support as well. And I think that I went to school locally as well in Woolwich, an area called Woolwich in South East London. And it's amazing, especially when you think about Lewisham over the next sort of 30, 40 years. If you look at the amount of the top English defenders or players that has come through Lewisham, it's been amazing. You had David Rocastle, you've had Ian Wright, and you've had Joe Gomez, who's a current England player, Tammy Abrahams. So there's been a real abundance of sort of talent that's come from the southeast of England, to come through and forge their careers in football. So, listen, I love my growing up. I'm proud to be a Lewisham boy, as they say, a South London man. And I've got such great memories of growing up, playing football, having fun. Because that's all you could do at the end of the day. I was that sort of era, 2 jerseys and you kick everything that moved. And, the communities were different then. And it was so much safer then as well. So you could have your breakfast in the morning and then just go out, and I'd sort of come home for a sandwich, where we lived in a high-rise block in Lewisham, and then, go back out and play football for the rest of the day, all imitating, pretending to be, different players. So, it was tough, it was challenging, but it was immense fun, created sort of a lot of values. It gets you streetwise as well. You get an education through being on the street. And, I have to say, compared to sort of my life that my children sort of leave, completely different life, of course. But as I always say, I wouldn't change my growing up for the world. Didn't have a lot, but, we had football, we had love. My parents were hardworking, come from a single-parent family, hardworking people, and just taught us good values about respect and decency. And I was just so privileged to get my career through sort of South East London and get the opportunities, because I saw so many great players over the years who were extremely talented but couldn't cope with a lot of the social issues and obviously fell by the wayside, lost themselves. So a lot of regret for that. But obviously I was very focused. I had some very strong women in my mother and my grandmother, first generation, immigrants. My grandmother was a small, stocky little woman, and she was tough. She was uncompromising, but she gave us lots of love. And it's those real values, that really I've taken with me in my life.
You touched upon it there, and it is all about opportunities. That is the fundamentals of any real success. So, what were the opportunities like for you? What were the grassroots football? What were those steps?
Yeah, I mean, it was challenging. I was very lucky. I played for some local Sunday teams, and my brother Jeff, my eldest brother, he was an exceptional player, fabulous talent, and many people thought in our family if anybody was going to make the grade as an elite player, it would be him. Sadly, he went to West Ham when he was sort of 15, 16, got a couple of bad injuries, and unfortunately didn't pursue a career. But, playing up local was really good. I played for my local Sunday team, and, some of the pitches then, I mean, what they play on today, I mean, it was... it's like a cow field at times, to be quite honest with you. But, playing locally, playing for a local football team and also having, I was kind of fairly fortunate because I got rejected by a number of clubs. I had trials at Chelsea, had trials at Luton Town, had trials at West Ham, all said I weren't good enough. So, you lose that rejection, you lose that confidence. And to be honest with you, I was playing on a common in South East London, and that's where my very first club, Charlton. It was a common not far from the football club, and a scout picked me up randomly, says, "Paul, we like you." I was like a little speedy right winger then. Didn't have, obviously, the kind of physicality, but I was fast, I was mobile, very nimble, playing as a right wing. And he says, "Listen, we think you've got something, why don't you come down?" And I was a bit, in honesty, I was disillusioned because nobody likes rejection. Nobody likes being told that you're good enough. And I remember, they say adversity breeds character. I just kept plugging away. I just kept going and kept chasing my aspirations and my dreams. And then when I went to Charlton, at sort of 15 years of age, within about sort of 7 or 8 months, I was in the youth team, then straight in the reserves. And days, as I was leaving school, which was very unusual, I got my debut in the first team against Crystal Palace. So it was like I went in there as a boy, and then you become a man overnight when you're in that structured environment, because you had players who were sort of 27, 28, who were very mature, who looked very mature, and I was like a young 16, 17-year-old boy, but obviously, I was fairly big for my age and fairly strong. So whilst I was physically mature, obviously I wasn't emotionally mature. So that was the sort of difference. To that integration into the football club was really, really good, and I learned so much.
Just before we move on to your career, and it's something it's a mainstay, and it's a recurrent theme, and you're so open about it as well. And it is the issue of racism. When you were growing up, in South London, as you say, the opportunities they were still there. But even at that young age, were you aware of societal racism? I understand that's quite a big question.
Yes, because ultimately, my mother and father, first generation immigrants from Jamaica, they grew up in that. They come into this country. And there were obvious challenges, but, it's quite interesting because, my mum and dad, particularly my dad, he had a lot of Irish and Scottish friends that they used to go to the pub with and have a drink, because basically, different colours, but same principles, different cultures, isn't it? Because obviously, blacks were excluded just as much as Irish people and Scottish people as well. So you had that sort of level of exclusion societally, socially. So there's only sort of certain pubs they know they could go to and be felt welcome. That's why they had their own parties and basically, done their own thing. And so we had a very sort of diverse, eclectic mix of upbringing, having different friends and, having Irish people and Scottish people who my dad's friends in particular. So I was aware and cognizant of those challenges that was going on. And obviously, as I got older, you saw the issues then with they called it then, it was the National Front, who was the equivalent of the BNP, and you saw the presence that they had on the streets, particularly in areas like Lewisham, where it was very, very difficult, and they had a strong visibility. So you had to be careful. There were certain areas that you could just not go socially, you just couldn't. And, when we moved from Lewisham into Woolwich, we didn't live far from where Stephen Lawrence, was actually brutally murdered. So I was growing up in that area knowing that there was just certain places that you just could not go, because you were susceptible to being, to meeting the wrong people at the wrong time. And I always had that instinct about that in football as well when I was young. When we used to play, sometimes you used to get sort of called names, people referring to your ethnicity, using that to support you. But it's just ignorance, isn't it? Lack of education, ignorance, vitriol. And obviously, so that kind of, I suppose, gave me the awareness, the understanding, which is why I remember my mum always saying to me, Paul, you've got to be twice as good to be even, to get the opportunity. And I think that's always, I've used that as a catalyst to fuel my motivation to go over and beyond, because, as I see with the work, I'm sure we'll come on and talk, that I've done over the last sort of 25, 30 years, everything that I've done, I can see now how it's played out through my life, from grassroots to the park, and then the whole way it's come through the whole sort of footballing system, and that unconscious bias, and that the racism and some of the despicable verbal abuse that one experienced, but how it shaped me for life. It gave me that extra layer of skin, motivation, application, attitude, dedication, and focus to really go for it with real vigor, to fulfill my career dream. So I was aware of it. I was conscious of it. There was abuse you were getting from other people. Yeah, I was a little bit naughty at times where I retaliated. Absolutely, I was a young boy, but I was very lucky because I had two older brothers. So I was like the younger brother. So I was very protected as well. Although I was susceptible as well, I was protected as well. So I was very lucky. So we were, we endured those challenges through that kind of schooling, grassroots system. And obviously thereafter, when my professional career started, wow, it went into it went exponentially then, all the issues of race, because as we know, it's a big issue in society, and it was those in society that, that used to plant themselves in football stadiums, and black players of my generation, we were the prime targets for all that vitriol and abuse.
Absolutely, and like you say, fans represent society. So when you made that move into Charlton, obviously, as you said, you made your debut at 16. What was the environment like in the dressing room? Obviously, 16, young guy, and a young black guy in the team.
Yeah, I mean, I was quite lucky because Charlton had a history of pubs were always comfortable with Charlton. And remember, down the road was Millwall, and in fact, Millwall, in terms of having black players, Millwall were on the same level as Charlton. You had players. I remember that time you had Phil Walker, who was a black player then, who was playing back in the 70s. He was kind of like one of my heroes. You had Trevor Lee, and then latterly thereafter they had John Fashanu as well. So Millwall, because if you go, to be quite frank, where Millwall's sort of situated in an area called New Cross in South East London, it's 99.9%, black Asian, just 99% say black people that used to live there, but only those in the stadium were predominantly white, so that said to you the power of the club, and obviously it probably evidenced the challenges that were there. And I think, Charlton was a fabulous dressing room. I had one naughty experience, and I remember when, we were having like an overnight stay, one of the very times that I stayed in a hotel, and I remember, this was a sort of, it was ignorance really, one of the players, who I won't name his name, but he actually said to me, should we get some cornflakes for Paul? So that was like in the morning when you were having breakfast, and if you're a young 16-year-old kid, that's very, very hurtful, and I remember that was saying to me, whilst, the whole environment was good, I really enjoyed the club, I liked the club, you still, in one or two individuals, you still had that bigoted, antisocial, ignorant behaviours. And obviously, I realised that, in truth, that was really a real microcosm of the bigger experiences that I'd seen and in all the different playing environments that I saw, not just in society, but within football clubs, within football stadiums.
Do you think that sort of environment, intensified it? As you say, there wasn't the education like there is now, or what there should be now back then. Do you think the dressing room, the atmosphere intensified it?
In an extent, yes, but also there was the other side of the fence was that people didn't understand the boundaries of banter. Right. And I'm one, I laugh. I don't have an issue when I hear jokes about different things, but you have to think about your behaviours now. But then it was really a free-for-all because there was no boundaries, and everybody deemed, there was a, listen, I don't think, Amy, you were even born then. There was a program there called Love Thy Neighbour, and that kind of perpetuated the racial stereotypes. And it was a TV program, and they used to use, language that was very, very acceptable. And you had a program with Alf Garnett, who was a historical West Ham supporter, and they were using language that was just the norm, and it was considered as the norm, which was really unpalatable, at that juncture. But it became standardised, nuanced parlances that people used, and it was wholly acceptable. So then, because nobody knew any better, but I knew as a black man it was offensive. But it's very hard for you to stand up and say, well, as a minority, hey, that's not right. But I had to do that eventually, and I did do that when you had more confidence in oneself, and also, the influence that I made as my career evolved, and I became a very successful footballer. So it was norm. It's a norm. It was just standardised, acceptable parlance at that juncture, at that living in that time, because nobody knew any better. And also in the stadiums, there wasn't a legislative framework. There wasn't the law that actually says such disgusting, reprehensible abuse is unlawful. This is against the law. This is, if you are behaved, if you get caught in this way, you are going to be punished, whether ejection from the stadium. But none of that was there. It was basically, I call it quite soft, it's quite simple, it's like the Wild West, to be quite frank with you. But that hardened me, and people saying, well, you shouldn't have had to put up with that. Well, we didn't know any better. Look what my mum and dad, my grandmother, all the people that I love, look what they've had to put up in the previous generation. So I just saw that as, well, Paul, you've just got to do that to get through, to be the best you can be. And then I realised about you becoming a role model, and people started to look up to you. So that was the other motivation as well. So all those sort of attitudes and behaviours, it gave me an extra steely resolve, but I was still human, still immature at 16, 17, and you're out there getting, abuse, being spat at, abuse from the supporters when you're in possession of the ball, monkey chanting, bananas thrown at you, coins thrown at you. It's a lot for a person to endure, let alone a very young player.
Absolutely. And as you say, you did have a very successful career, and right from the off, you got a very big move. You went to Luton Town, first division club at that time. What was that like? Amy,
it was amazing, because I tell you the reason why. Because, I've done great. I loved Charlton. It was my first club. And to be honest with you, it was very interesting because there was rumours about that Arsenal wanted to buy me. And, apparently they came to watch me, and I was so excited. And I remember there's a paper called the Evening Standard, which sort of covers all the London news, and it had in there, Arsenal preparing to make sort of a £400,000 bid for young Charlton starlet Paul Elliott. And I was like so excited when I saw my name in the paper. And obviously you believe that you're not mature enough to understand all the nuances that go on and all the paper talk. And when Charlton, they had a lot of issues, financial problems, and, when I heard that, I remember it was Lenny Lawrence calling me into the dressing room and said to me, Paul, we're dreadfully sorry. We've had to sell you. There's a club that wants to buy you. We're going to drive you to a hotel in Essex. And I'm thinking, it's Arsenal, it's Arsenal, it's Arsenal, it's Arsenal. I was terribly excited. I couldn't even sort of, speak to my mum. So I'm in the car and he's saying, Paul, we're in trouble, blah, 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 blah. And then when I got to the hotel, he says, Paul, I'm going to tell you who the club is. And he says, it's Luton Town. And I felt like collapsing, to be honest with you. I'm thinking, damn, I want to... But I have to say, after listening to David Pleat, who was the manager then, I was 18 years of age. After 10 minutes, I knew this was the club I wanted to join. It was a wonderful club, and to be honest with you, oddly, I've kept all these years. That was over 30 years ago, and I spoke with David Pleat last week. We still keep in touch. I saw him at the Wembley FA Cup final, so we're friends, we text, and I said to him, David, I've played for some big clubs, I've played for a lot of clubs, but I can't tell you how happy I was at Luton, not just on the field, but off the field, in the dressing room. And I says, you created that culture. And it's quite interesting, Amy, because he was Jewish, so obviously he understood about the anti-Semitism, the challenges that he had. He was as a Jewish player, then becoming a Jewish manager. And then I remember one particular game, we had about 8 black players with Luton Town playing against Southampton, sorry. And it was just, unbelievable, that people just thinking, where's all this diversity come from, all these black players. So David, he was very much a pioneer in his time, and he was one that he fought the fought. He gave everybody the chances, equal opportunities, because that's what it was all about, regardless of their race, colour, creed, religion, gender, disability, sexuality, etc. It's about giving equal opportunities, and David was just simply a wonderful man. So my time at Luton was brilliant because we had about regularly playing with 4 or 5 players in the black, so you had Ricky Hill, Brian Steen, Emma Canavan, Joby, you had Ray Daniels, you had Mitchell Thomas, myself. So that's not, so to have that diversity in the dressing room, but it was a brilliant dressing room. David created, it's all about culture. When you talk about culture in football and working environments, we had an amazing culture in the football club, and that was done by David Please. So it's the most brilliant move, and I've got so much affection for that club.
I guess that's kind of what you're promoting now, and we'll definitely come on to it later, but it's that culture, like you say. So David Pleat himself, Jewish, you have diversity within and the structure of the club. That was unknown back then. Absolutely.
Listen, he was the very, very first. I mean, and I think we got beat in the game or whatever. It was probably, they're saying, no, it's all the black players' fault. We got beat, But David, when you talk about true game changers, and he had to be brave to do that, because he would have been under a lot of pressure. And Luton was a very diverse local community, but it was he was a very, very brave man, and that's how you change culture. And when, as you say, when I was having a conversation with the English FA, where I was in a board meeting, and we're talking about we have to change culture for organisations to evolve. Governing bodies, institutions in business, charity, across football, it's all about culture. You get the culture right, and there's a wonderful domino effect. If the culture's wrong, you will not be successful. And it's the same with football. And so you could have the wrong culture off the field, and that will permutate itself into the dressing room and also onto the field of play. And great managers like Sir Alex Ferguson, great managers like, Jock Stein, what they've done, they created great cultures in the dressing room. And it was like the golden thread that runs throughout the whole of the club, from, the little lady that used to come and clean the boots, do all the cleaning, all the mundane tasks. They had as much self-importance as your number 9 striker. Everybody was treated the same and equitably. And you find that all the big clubs, that's why Sir Alex and Jock Stein, who are great sort of heroes of mine, they were not just great managers, but great people because of where they come from and the humility and their background. So culture, for me, is critical to success. I don't know a team yet that's got a bad culture and are successful.
You talk about great people, and I think that's a perfect blend into your next move. You were at Aston Villa, and you were under the great Billy McNeill.
Yeah, Big Billy. I mean, what a great man he was, and I remember, he came at the club in it's like a period of transition, to be quite honest with you. And I think then, he had already left Celtic, went down to, he left Celtic, went Man City, then come to Aston Villa. And, it was challenging, but it was, this man had a presence, my goodness me. When he'd come out, his big barrel chest, sticking out, and we had a fantastic relationship. And it was just great because he was a centre-half, a world-class centre-half, a leader. And obviously I couldn't have had a better role model to learn from, to support me, to mentor me, to show me, to impact with me. And it was great. So obviously, things didn't work out. Things weren't fantastic for him on the field. But Villa was a big club, a huge club, very diverse fan base. And it was a period of transition because they had so much success in the 80s when they won the European Cup. So, someone like Big Billy, to be fair, he was the right person possibly at the wrong time, because you're in that period of transition. And transition, you need patience, and football is a relentless business. You don't get the patience and the time you want. So, but it was great for me to engage with him, work alongside him, obviously build a relationship with him, because it was on the back of that relationship that obviously we reconnected when I'd done my time in Italy and obviously went to Celtic. Absolutely.
So you touched on it there. What attracted you to Italy? I think even now in the game, we'll touch upon it. There's a societal racism even to a greater extent in Italy. So what took you out there?
I was young, only 23. I always say I went there a boy and come back a man. And I think at that time, Italy was easily, it was the equivalent of the Premier League today.
Yeah.
It was the number one league in the world. I remember, my first game was against AC Milan. You had Elliott, Van Basten, Rijkaard, Maldini, Baresi, Costa Corta. I could tell you the whole team, And then my second game was against Naples, against Napoli. I marked Maradona. I remember all my family coming over to watch me in Italy play against Maradona. The third game we played against Juventus. I was marking Ian Rush then, because you were playing against players, the best players in the world at the peak of their careers. So for me, I was so honoured, to be this young, black boy from southeast London, from Lewisham, come through the ranks, forged a professional career. I was just thinking sort of Charlton, Luton, Aston Villa, and then when Pisa came calling, I'm thinking, well, they were very, in many respects, it reminded me of Luton, because they got promoted from Serie B. Just like when I went to Luton then, who were then in the first division, they got promoted from Division 2. So there was that continuity in the squad where there was all young players, all come locally, and Pisa was very much like that. It was a great club, a great time. And the other foreign player was a guy called Carlos Dunga, who was the Brazilian player, Brazilian manager, because at that time each club Amy could only have 2 foreign players. So I felt really special, to make me feel, well, they chose me. I was one of the chosen ones. And how the move come about, they watched me actually when I was at Aston Villa, because they were very interested in Mark Walters. We had a friendly, Pisa against Aston Villa. We went out to Italy, and Mark, he had some problems with his hamstrings, and it just so happens that I just sort of flourished. And then they came back. They were watching me over a period of 3 or 4 months. And during that time, I recall playing against Kenny Dalglish, Mark Hughes, Kerry Dixon, Gary Lineker, Graham Sharp, and Ian Rush, critically, who Juventus had a pre-contract to sign for 3.5 million. So they're thinking, well, we've seen this guy. I had a purple patch. I had let's just say I had a great 2 months. And that was the catalyst to the move.
You touched upon some great names there. What are your memories of Elliott, Maradona, Ian Rush? Like you say, they are in their prime.
Yeah, and Elliott, he was unbelievable, because he's built like a middleweight boxer. He had this stature, he had this presence, this authority on the pitch. And he's probably one of the very few players in the world that I've seen. You've got your Ronaldos and your Messis and your Maradonas. He's obviously at that level. He could be effective anywhere on the pitch, but he had a great work ethic, and that was the start of the great, AC Milan team. And then Van Basten, simply, in terms of the centre forward, he arguably was, for me, the best centre forward of all, one of the best. He's probably the best centre forward I've ever played. He had everything: height, stature, speed, technical ability, tremendous movement, aggressive, great team player. And Maradona, it was like, I got sent off actually, because I clumped Maradona on the halfway line. And I got a red card actually, so I was a bit naughty, got a red card. But playing against him, it's like he had magic in his feet. Magic. He didn't know what he was doing, at a low sense of gravity. He just had this unbelievable repertoire of skill sets, and I know when we were playing them previously in the warm-up, he had his own physio, he was warming up, and he was like, playing Keep Me Up with 2 oranges, doing all these skills with the 2 oranges simultaneously. It was like just mass entertainment. So he was just spectacular, phenomenal. So I suppose I was so privileged to be in that company, and more importantly, make a positive contribution on behalf of Pisa. And so I really felt that my whole game, technically, tactically, I was more mature. I learned to speak the language. I integrated myself into the culture, which is very important. Could speak fluent Italian after sort of 7 or 8 months. And I loved my 2 years there, to be quite frank. And also got many friends still. My best friend, a guy called Luca Ciccone, he was the very first guy I met 35 years ago, got introduced to, we text each other, I WhatsApp him, 3 days ago. So, those relationships are brilliant, very important, significant relationships. And I went back just before lockdown. It was about 6 months before lockdown. They opened a museum in Pisa, and they asked me to go and open it. And it was, you made to feel so welcome.
Yeah.
So it was brilliant, wonderful.
I think in recent times, there's been quite a lot of attention on the way that how racism is still so prevalent in the Italian game. There's been Moise Kean, Mario Balotelli, Romelu Lukaku. So it's still so prevalent now. Why do you feel that, there have been advancements here, and we'll definitely come on to that. It's not an issue that's been cured or solved, but we've made advancements and we've made improvements. But Italy, it doesn't quite seem the case.
It's a very challenging environment, Italy, because I think the problem is there's a lot of, you've got obviously the ultras, you've got that sort of fascist side of the attitudes, and a lot of those people, they've got tremendous power. It's what they've done, they've got a toxic mix of the politics, and that creates a lot of that extremist type of behaviour. And it was evident to me, and that's why historically, for the beauty, Italy, I can't say to you, I've been very lucky to travel the world. It's probably one of the most beautiful countries in the world. Yeah. The people, the food, everything about the country, the culture, that side of the culture, the historical buildings, very warm. And I know that I was very fortunate because I went there as an eminent, prominent footballer. But then if you go 600 metres from the stadium, then you see the other ugly side of for the beauty, you see great social deprivation, you see, a lot of the immigration. And to be quite frank, Italy, like a lot of other countries, they've got that racism, that internalised racism within their own culture, because you've got the north, which is very prosperous, very affluent, and you've got the south, where there's a lot of social deprivation and a lot of poverty. And they've got yellow skin Italians in the south, and you've got the northern, which is like more white, like your complexion, say, Amy. And what they do, the north call the South Africans.
Yeah.
So that, dysfunctional culture is embedded. It's embedded in the fabric of their culture. So when you've got that, their own against each other, what chance does somebody, who's of a darker shade of skin going to have? So I was just lucky, because obviously I went there as a footballer, so I was treated well. You're looked after, so you're not really susceptible to a lot of those kind of social and cultural challenges. I was very closeted in that context, but obviously that was only closeted until I got on the field of play. I got a lot of abuse, a lot of issues in obviously Italy, but I soon realised the issues of racism, discrimination, prejudice, it comes in all different guises and forms, and it's throughout the whole world, but obviously it manifests a lot around football, because football is the vehicle and the catalyst for those right-wing extremists to launch their recruitment drives. It was the same in the UK, the National Front, the BNP, they've done the same thing. And it's also happened in Italy. So, it was prevalent. Let's be honest with you. That was that political alignment. They've all got their political engagement with their respective party. That was a prominent part of football. That's the reality of the situation.
Absolutely. And as you say, the discrimination comes in many forms. you make the move to Glasgow, obviously. Billy McNeill is a deciding factor. Were there other clubs interested at you at that time? Like you say, you're coming to a good age, you've got a fantastic career behind you. Who else were the sort of clubs interested?
I know because Brian Clough was then at Nottingham Forest. He was very interested in signing me. So was QPR and so was West Ham. They were the three clubs that expressed a serious level of interest. And Chelsea were kind of hovering around as well. But to be honest with you, I mean, it was Mark Walters. Mark was my best mate in football. We played together at England. We played at Aston Villa, and we always, went out socially. And he rang me, and then when it was, there was some rumour factory. I got some calls from some journalists in Scotland, and that just say, listen, big man, what do you think? I've heard that Celtic are interested in you. Blah 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 blah. I said, Celtic, really? I'm thinking, wow. So I just thought at that juncture. I was 25, still had another 5 years, So I thought, well, yeah, I could go back to, say, England, back to then the First Division. But look at the experience I would have missed out. I knew about Celtic, you knew about Jotstein, Billy McNeill, the history of the club, the tradition of the club. And also I remember growing up, and also in my career, I knew in London you had like the Celtic supporters clubs. There were some in South London, some in Kilburn, and that was the alignment with the Irish community, So I knew that they existed. So I knew that, Celtic was really bigger than a football club. It was like an institution. So my instinct said, because I had that kind of nomadic instinct in me, left home when I was young, went to, Luton Town, big move, Aston Villa, big move, Celtic, big move. I thought, well, at 25, let's go to Scotland, let's go to Glasgow. And let's be honest, quite frankly, I absolutely adored my time in Glasgow, in Scotland. And more importantly, I love the people. It's the values, the integrity, the humour. It was just off the scale for me. I just love the humour. And for all the challenges that I had, obviously, with the racist abuse, it was superseded by the most wonderfulest, kindest, funniest people that I've ever come across with a great sense of integrity. I loved it.
You do mention Mark Walters, and actually just last night I watched the documentary where he talks through obviously his time at Rangers, and it's the first time I've seen his first game. His debut was a derby, an Old Firm derby, and the bananas are getting thrown on. Then there's the week after he plays Hearts, and there's coins getting thrown as well as the bananas. Yeah. How does he sell it to you then? What brings you there? That's one of your best friends. You're aware he's went through that. How does he sell that?
Because I think we were both mature enough. We had a grown up conversation. I says, Mark, I says, am I going to get grief up there? He says, big man, everywhere you go, you're going to get grief because that's the world. But he says the good supersedes the bad, and to be honest with you, he was very open, and I just thought, well, I knew he was getting that kind of grief. So I'm thinking at that point, you've got a top player who's a black player at Rangers. I could become that equivalent at Celtic, and then we could use the power of that to try and make that social change through the power of football. So be assured that future strategy, because I'd like to feel I've done the same in Italy. I went there, challenging circumstances. People look at you, and then you leave there saying, they're looking at you now through football as a good footballer, but also a good human being, and demonstrating to people, well, you don't judge people, by the colour of their skin. Judge them by the content of their character, their hearts, their behaviours. So there's that sort of byproduct of that kind of that education to mobilise people and using your own power. You don't realise it at the time, but by being successful, Amy, that gives you a platform, it gives you confidence, people then approach you, and then you can use that platform to talk about the other issues, and you have to be brave to do that, because obviously, I've been criticised, and there's no problems with criticism, because people don't want to hear people with power and influence trying to make change. They've got their own agenda. But really, people realised that what I was doing was using my power wisely, judiciously and constructively to make change and bring people on the journey. So I can see where Mark was coming from, but in many respects, the more he said that, I thought about all my previous moves and my kind of legacy in that sense, you know. And I think, well, imagine if I could go to Scotland and have a similar impact as a footballer on the field of play, and then use that leverage, you know, to talk about and challenge their other issues around racism and bigotry. Absolutely.
And it was more than a successful stint at Celtic for yourself. The club, perhaps not so much. What did you know, obviously, Jock Stein and Billy McNeill, but at that time, who were you impressed with as your teammates? You know, like you say, it was a tricky time for the side.
I knew Paul McStay. I remember when I was a kid growing up in southeast London, in Lewisham, and I remember watching this programme about we call him the Hat, Jack the Hat McVitie, you know, and I remember watching a programme about Paul McStay, and he must have been about 16, 17, and I remember Inter Milan were trying to sign him, you know, and they said they were prepared to pay then about £300,000-500,000, which is just an astronomical amount of money.
Big money.
And I remember him. I mean, he played for Scotland, you know, under 15 schoolboys, right the way through. And they were saying that this guy is going to be the next world, you know, international superstar, you know. And he was so revered. So he was one that I watched, and so I knew he was obviously at Scotland, in Scotland playing for Celtic, and I knew of, you know, Big D, Derek White. You had Josie Miller. You know, you had John Hewitt, who was a left wing, a very talented player. And I then remember that you had up front Dariusz Jakonowski was a great. You know, when he come from Poland, he's one of my best mates, and we're still in touch today. And he was a really top player. And then Dariusz Dobczak. So all of a sudden, it was like an international, diverse dressing room, and again, that was a period of transition. So I mean, I loved the boys. They're great lads, great set of lads. You know, Chris Morris, Anton Rogan, Paki Bonner. You know, they're great. You know, I know Peter Grant. You know, Granty. You know, so it was a fabulous dressing room and a great set of lads. And I. To be honest with you, I mean, what I really loved, I loved the big games, you know, with Rangers, and I was very lucky because, Rangers, again, you know, I could pick off their team. I knew Souness was a good lad, but, you know, you had sort of Terry Butcher, Richard Gough, John Brown, Bomber Brown, you know, you had the fullback, Gary was at Everton, you had Trevor Stephen, Gary Stephen, you had, you know, who else was there, Trevor Hurlock. You know, up front you have obviously Mo Johnson, Ali McCoy, Mark Haitley. So, you know,
rattles them off.
You just don't. And they were the most brilliant games. I loved playing in the Old Firms because I loved playing on a big stage, on the big platform, because that was your time for me, you know, to make your name. So I loved it, you know, and I love, you know, the intensity of the social thing. You've got the two biggest clubs in Scotland within a 3-mile radius. But I love the intensity of that. I love the intensity of the pressure of the big games, the media build-up, the games itself, and then thereafter socially. So it was absolutely magnificent, you know. And obviously, you know, winning the Scottish Player of the Year, the first black player to win that, and that was very important because that sets the trend. Because I think about, 3 or 4 months ago, I'd done some pieces to camera, you know, with Sky about the Old Firm and looking at the whole diversity. And I was like one of the first prominent, you know, black individuals to play for Celtic. And diversity now is fixture and fitting in the Scottish game. So that's the evolution, you know, of diversity and how the clubs, the brilliant work that both Celtic and Rangers and others do in the community, how it's really paid dividends to welcome people to Scotland and Glasgow.
I see you thrived on the big stage, and with a big stage brings a big crowd. You touched on as well, Jakonowski, the European nights. I think of that, the Partizan Belgrade game. You know, it's still not enough to put Celtic through. But how much did you revel in, you know, the fans, the hundreds of thousands of fans?
My goodness, I mean, I could imagine how, you know, thinking about the lockdown. Imagine, I know the suffering of all the fans, but I think about supporters like Celtic who are just totally immersed in the culture of the club. So I don't know how they've suffered. I don't know how they've managed in this brutal adversity. But the supporters, that's where it was a way of life. We've touched on culture. Celtic is a culture. Celtic is a way of life. There is a way, there is a manner, there is a behaviour, there is an attitude, there is a sincerity, there's an engagement, there's a movement. Celtic is a movement of a culture that embraces all the good things about people, attitudes, behaviours. If the other person hasn't got a lot, somebody will break off their so-and-so and help. It's a culture of sharing, of respect, of humanity, of decency, all the good things in that you want from people and human and social behaviours. And that's what really struck a chord with me. And that's why I think, I kind of really galvanised towards that, because I knew that it was special. It's like, if you could bottle it and it'd be worth billions of pounds, because the club's a global brand, isn't it? It's a global brand, Celtic, and it's that culture that has created that brand, that specialness. I think Liverpool's got it. I think Celtic's got it. I think Rangers. There's certain kind of clubs, they have that cult. They have that, and Celtic unequivocally, globally, they've got that. They've got such this nice way about them, that I just find. As I think, and I think a lot of people have that in the north anyway, to be honest with you, because there's a different social demographic and upbringing, and you have different type of values, that I don't necessarily always see in other areas of the country. So that really struck a chord with me, that really did, and I just couldn't understand the intensity, how their whole life was central in the football club. Everything that went on in the football club was the key component in the DNA of their life. So their social, their personal, their working life, all the areas of their life. Celtic was that, when we talk about, I say, my work, equality, diversity and inclusion, EDI has got to be that central theme and embedded in the culture. That's got to be the golden thread throughout football organisations, businesses. That's the same way I felt about the Celtic culture. It was embedded in the whole of the DNA, and it was remarkable, extraordinary, to be quite frank.
You do. You talk about the legacy that you've left pretty much at every club you've played for, and you say that they are obviously Player of the Year. Trailblazer is a big word, but how that ultimately is what you were, being the first black man to win that. How much pride do you hold in that? Massive,
because it was a very. You're talking in 1989, wasn't it? When I arrived, and because I suppose I looked at it, I reflected on my upbringing, my journey in the game, and I think I've sort of taken on similar types of those principles with the work that I do. The first, say, black person to sit on the FA board and chair a board, and and the FA Council, because I wanted to make that transition. But it's pride, isn't it? Because I think whilst supporters, I know I won numerous sort of Player of the Year, Celtic Player of the Year, but when you speak to a professional footballer or an ex-professional footballer, the respect of the people you work with or compete against is arguably the most important respect. That I was lucky I had both, but I talk as an elite sportsman, that the people that you compete and participate with and against, their opinions of you is the most important opinion. More than journalists, arguably more than supporters, because there could be a number of reasons why supporters don't like somebody, but your fellow professional brethren, their consideration and estimation of you is the most important psychological and professional emotional feeling. That's the most important thing to me as a man and a player.
An asset the country, to the league, a shining light in the team where there wasn't many lights at that time. Is there anything that Celtic could have done to keep you, to save you moving down south?
Because, I had obviously there was some challenges I had with the board, and then these things happen. Everybody falls out, you fall out with teammates, media, But I think, if I'm being honest with you, it was all about timing. I was 27, and to be honest, Amy, I had 4 or 5 big moves then, because if you, and I think you probably might understand, most centre halves, like a Roy Aitken, like a Tommy Burns, I'll just use them for example, particularly as defenders, you'd stay at one club for 10 years, wouldn't you? Billy McNeill, you'd have your whole career at one club. But I had this nomadic, interesting, eclectic mix of moves in different cultures, in different environments, different working environments. And I think that was, and it was so, it was unheard of. Defenders in my generation would never move, only midfield players or forwards would move with that frequency like they do today, But that was very uncharacteristic. And I just felt at that time, 27, peak of my game, had 2 fabulous years, and that was just the time for me to go back home to London. And obviously the Chelsea thing was a perfect situation because they were a big club, a huge club, under-tapped club. And one of my biggest, satisfaction, I suppose, or achievements at Celtic, that Chelsea was being their first black captain. Because again, Chelsea, back in the 70s, I remember playing against Chelsea in really challenging circumstances as a 16, 17-year-old boy and getting absolutely, the abuse was just reprehensible. So to have seen the evolution of Chelsea, Ken Bates was a great man, a great owner, really liked him. And then obviously, the following year, sort of the Premier League started. So Chelsea, in many respects, was going from that kind of domestic, sort of toxic area into an international, global brand that attracted your Ruud Gullits, Glenn Hoddles, Gianluca Viallis. The fan base was then, it was an international, global club. So, that was so attractive. I inherit, so, yeah, but it was great satisfaction. So I've really, and I think, if I look at my move, every move I made, there's obviously a right footballing imperative behind that, but I think there was a social and an ethical and a moral imperative behind the moves as well for the impact to challenge the social norms and all the issues and the challenges that I had through leveraging my power as a leader, as a centre half, as the captain of the field, to lead, to drive, to inspire, and that obviously reverberates and impacts people as well. So I kind of feel that everything that happened to me, you don't know it at the time, but that journey was meant to happen because that gave me the seamless transition into the work that I'm doing now, So now I'm no longer can talk on the field of play, but I talk in front of TV cameras, I talk in boards, councils, committees, to make that difference. So the very same continuity of messaging from the field of play as a leader, as an example, I've got that continuity in my DNA, but doing it in a different way, in a more meaningful way, probably, where you need to make those changes to get greater diversity, inclusion and equality, into football, from the boardrooms, into football business, into boards, councils, committees, community jobs. So that whole inclusion and diversity is such a critical, and that's been exemplified by the last 14 months and George Floyd and everything that's gone on and all the issues the challenges that I have, that many people have experienced around institutional, structural, systematic racism, social inequalities. All that has come out in the world. And I travelled the world, as a young player, seeing all that, experiencing all that, but then it's sort of the manifestation of that, in the world itself, through what's gone on by this, poor man that brutally murdered, and the good that's going to come from that. So, that's been this unbelievable journey. So, I always said if I think there's a lot more miles left. I'm still a relatively young man, but if everything my life stopped tomorrow, I'd be happy. But I don't. I want more life because I've got lots to do, more people to change, to affect, to challenge, to mobilise, to lead, and to make continual change.
Talking about change, and like you say, that is epitomises everything you're trying to do. So mirroring almost your move to Chelsea at that time as well, you rightly mentioned probably back in that time there was a real link with Chelsea and the National Front, but you mentioned a name there in Ken Bates. Does that sort of, emulate that it is people who can cause change and people make change? It's not policy, it's the people. So him coming in brought brilliant. Chelsea that next step forward.
Correct. Ken was brilliant. I mean, he got a lot of grief for supporting black players. He used to get bullets in the post and a lot of things, and he told me, said to me, Paul, I want you to be my captain, be my first black captain, and you made a point there before, and this is what I try and say to people when I'm talking on a wider political level. It's not policy that makes frame or the framework of policy, it's people, and people doing the right thing. And Ken Bates has done, he might have upset a few other people, I don't doubt it, with Batesy, I call him, Uncle Ken, but you know what? He has been unbelievably loyal and magnificent towards me, and the opportunities and the support that he's given me has been immense. So he is living now in Monaco and, enjoying his life, and, it's people like that, and that's why it's those people with the power that use the power, That's so important, people using power, not for self, use the power to make change, and bring people on the journey and make a difference and make people's lives better, more equitable, and provide better opportunities in the workplace and opportunities for people, through sport. So, that's why the work that I do now, my relationships, I make change through my relationships with people. People that's got that empathy, people that, you can take on that journey, and people that trust you, because they know with me, I'll always do the right thing for football. I call myself a change agent. I'm a change agent, an agent of change. That's what I do because it's the right thing to do. But there's a lot of good people out there that's also doing some brilliant work, and I co-partner with them on my journey. So it's great.
It is all about changing, as you say. So 30 years ago, if it be you or if it be Mark Walters, you're singling out because it's the one black man on the pitch, and I'll use my own experience here. I watch Celtic, I watch down south, I watch any football game, and it would never even occur to me, bat an eyelid, to even think if it's a black player, if it's a white player, because to me it's all just the same. So as you say, it's that changes came in on the pitch, and that is fantastic because it's not viewed any differently. But what is the issue in the boardrooms, and in senior management? How do we get that diversity there? What's going wrong?
That's been the biggest single challenge, because obviously, and I should also say in Scotland, people like Fraser Wishart has been doing a brilliant job. Tony Higgins, I only spoke with them last week. We're talking about the challenges and giving them support. So that's, I call my Scottish brethren, my Scottish partners. So they're great guys, and JP. So that's the big taboo now, because I think the problem is, and this is football, it's built on those old networks, and part of my job is to sort of say to those, I'm sort of like, you have to change, because this, there's evidence, there's data out there, you've got to modernise your organisations. Football clubs are global brands. And then there's the economic imperative. In my political argument, I actually say, when the Premier League started in 1992, the TV rights was worth 192 million for the domestic rights, 40 million for the international rights. Fast forward 30 years, the domestic rights is worth close to 5 billion, and the international rights are worth 3 billion. So the last cycle was worth 3 billion, was worth 8 billion pounds. And the reason is because, in the Premier League now, you've got 61% of the players are foreign. And the Premier League is shown now in 188 countries worldwide. So the Premier League, its whole business model, Amy, is built on one thing: diversity. So when I say to people, that's the economic upside of having a diverse and inclusive work field on the field of play. Don't you think then your board, so your chairman or your vice chairman or your senior executive, your commercial manager, shouldn't you be having that same principles of that diversity on the field? Because look at your audience. Your audience is no longer, the 60 million people in the UK or the X amount of people in Scotland. It's global. It's over Asia, Africa, North and Central America, China, So you must understand there's the economic imperative of a diverse and inclusive workforce, as well as the social imperative as well, to do the right thing, because diversity is good. Diversity of thinking is very, very important, because you can't have all Paul Elliott's on the board, but you can't have also all Amy's on the board. Yeah. You can have a bit of Amy, a bit of Paul Elliott, a bit of somebody else, to have diverse thinking. And that's how you learn. You learn when you talk to people from diverse backgrounds, different cultures, think differently, do differently. How do you empower and engage and mobilise? So then you become a more worldly, a more effective, efficient individual. And boards are more effective and efficient because of the diversity of the personnel. They bring difference, and I've seen it at the FA board, where it's more effective and efficient, better decision makers, corporate governance, more, transparency, more fairness, more openness, because of the diversity of the board. That's what it brings. And so you've got the social narrative, and you've got the human narrative, and you've got the business narrative. And that's where, through my work with the FA, I've created this diversity code, a leadership diversity code, where all the clubs have signed up to the code. So they're going to have targets in the boardroom, targets in middle management, targets for senior leadership positions, targets for women in boards, women doing coaching, minority ethnic groups, more transparency on the recruitment, more diverse panels. So it's not about talking anymore. It's about putting a framework in place, because the Black Lives Matter, I think it's so important, Amy, because the modern day players, it's a sign of, it's a symbol to them. It's a sign of unity. It's their sign of engagement. They have a correlation and a relationship with that model. But now that still should continue. But then you have to have a cogent, coherent, structure within the organisation that holds football clubs to account. That's the action. This is the lobby, the visibility, the empowerment, but this is the action plan that holds football to account, and football's got to evolve and grow and be far more diverse.
Thinking back to obviously the incident that happened in the Charlton dressing room with a teammate, and then you fast forward 30 years now, as you say, you're seeing players, and not just black players, white players, standing with their black players or kneeling with their black players. What does that mean to you as a black man, as a former black footballer, seeing that connection, seeing that unity?
You know what, Amy, in my opinion, that's arguably the most potent, powerful message, because in my dressing room, in my world, I was alone. Yeah. People didn't know how to cope with it. They didn't understand us as big. They just think because, Paul, you're 6'2", built like a middleweight boxer, you're all right, big man, But I have a heart. I have thoughts. I have feelings like everybody else. I have weaknesses. I have strengths. So I'm no different, because of my physicality or my leadership, or, So in my opinion, when I see down in the UK, what I've done, when I created a structure, I had like my football board, I had a coaches board, football board, administrators board, female coaches, diverse coaches. On my football board, to contribute into the code was Jordan Henderson, Harry Kane, Tyrone Mings, Wes Morgan, Lucy Bronze, best woman player in the world, Leah Williamson, Nikita Paris. So that captured that diversity. So imagine, those black players now, you've got Jordan Henderson, Harry Kane, England captain, Tottenham captain, Liverpool captain, England vice captain, alongside you saying, this is wrong. We are standing shoulder to shoulder. We are standing with the utmost solidarity and respect alongside our brothers, our footballers. Amy, that for me is the most powerful medium for change, that the black players now, not just white players, they've got everybody, international players, women, that same diversity on the pitch. They're all standing shoulder to shoulder in the fight and show a sign of unity and solidarity. That's the most powerful movement, because that's visible then, isn't it? That visibility.
You know, Paul Elliott can't be in his role forever, as much as we'd like him to be, and I'm not saying anytime soon that he's disappearing, but how much hope does that's it for you for the future? You know, you mentioned Tyrone Mings there, the great work he's doing, Troy Deeney, Marcus Rashford, but crucially, as you say, it's your white counterparts, it's Harry Kane, it's your Jordan Hendersons moving forwards. How much hope do you have that, you know, we've came a long way in 30 years, but by no means is this over?
No, I mean, it's funny because I was listening to a former player and it was interesting. I mean, he was said, until you change society with racism, you're never going to change football.
Yeah.
I would reverse it back. I would say, if there's 7 billion people in the world, and within that 7 billion people, 4.5 billion people are watching the Premier League, and the EFL is the fifth most watched league in the world, if you can change football, and the Premier League's in 188 countries worldwide, wouldn't you say there's a consideration, if you can use the power of football to make the change, given the impact and the prominence and the eminence and the visibility of football and what it means to the world, you're going to have a better chance to change society more than changing society first and thereafter as a byproduct changing football? That's my analogy. That's my rationale. I think, and that's where football is not responsible for all of societal ills, but you know, football's got a massive role to play, and that's why clubs like Celtic, Rangers, they're doing some brilliant work in the roots of the community. Aberdeen, Hearts, Dundee, all relative to their local communities. They do some brilliant work, and that's using the power of football to activate and mobilise and change and evolve the communities. So I think that's the way you do it. You can get football right. You're always going to have people, as you've correctly, you know, the biggest challenge now is the social media, you know, with all the criticisms towards black players, women. But the government are on that, you know. We're doing a lot of work down there, and that was one of the conversations I was having with the guys, you know, in Scotland about, you know, our joint collaboration, because that's what we do: share knowledge, share ideas, share best practice. So for me, it's an easier fix to fix football than what it is to fix society. Fix football, and then the domino effect is you can really impact society. So I'm an optimist.
No, not at all, and rightly so. You know, we're coming up towards the Euros. Obviously, they're coming to the UK. In comparison, obviously, to like we say, to even to Italy, how proud are you to see, like you say, these figures, your Tyrone Mings and your Jordan Hendersons, they have put this country in football in such great stead. So no matter what the Euros brings, well, no matter what, you know, challenges could be thrown and faced with us, we're sitting in good stead, aren't we? Yes,
and also I say that for England, but I also have to say to you, I've got to pay tribute to Scotland as well.
Absolutely.
Steve Clarke is a great mate of mine. We played together at Chelsea. The work that he has done as an individual, putting his head above the parapet, setting the example, took a lot of stick, as you know, because when you do brave and big things, he's a principled man, Steve. Quiet, unassuming, top guy, very principled. So I think it's great, that solidarity there. And you look at, to answer your question, what the guys are doing down south. And that's been exemplified by Gareth Southgate, great man, great manager, like Steve Clarke. So we've got that, you know, we've got that new generation of player, but we've got the same with the next generation of managers as well. And I think it would be fantastic. And to have, you know, we've got 7 games, you know, down in at Wembley, which will be great. And obviously I'm hopeful to be there to watch Scotland against England. That would be just fantastic. So I'm, you know, I think that having had the experiences I've had, the journey that I've lived, you can go through in my world and you can say, am I really going to bury my head in the half empty, or am I going to do it in the half full end? And my life, my leadership, my attitude to change, my attitude to bringing people with me, is always about the half full end. Take people on the journey, because it's easy to say what's wrong, but isn't it even better to say what's right and this is how we fixed it?
Absolutely. Paul, I cannot thank you enough. This has been an absolute honour to talk to you for over an hour, and I could speak to you for so many more. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I know I speak on behalf of many Celtic fans that you're so loved up here. You really are, and I thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, I'm honoured. That's why I'm happy to give up my time to great people like you, your country, because you want to, you're one of my disciples now, you have to lobby, you're fighting the cause for women as well, for the issues around, gender discrimination, because it's about all forms of discrimination. You just have to speak about ethnicity, but it's also about your gender, about your disability, about your sexuality. So it's all about all those things where people just want to live, to capture where we're coming from. I always say, regardless of, race, colour, creed, religion, gender, disability, sexuality, age, equality of opportunity is a fundamental God-given right. It's no privilege. So that's the best way to end. Thank you to all your listeners. Everybody keep working together, because, another line that I always say, alone we do so little, together everyone achieves more. TEAM. Scotland now have got a team on the pitch. Now,
good time.
England's got a team on the pitch. Now, we have to build the same positive team with the same types of people to make change within the structures of football and the rub-on effect in society and community. So thank you all, and thank you to everybody.
Paul Elliott, thank you for joining me on Soccer Supernova.